Deputy Minister Michael Oren,
yes.
Shalom.
Shalom.
You're coming in now from the memorial, the 9/11 memorial. Back then, 9/11, where were you?
I was at the Shalem Center in Jerusalem, an outstanding research center, writing a book about the 6-Day War. They were called 6 Days of War.
And I understand that your son was actually in America those days.
My son was graduating high school from in Jerusalem and about to go into the Israeli army. He and his friends went on a trip. On September 10th, they took a selfie on the top of the World Trade Center. We have that photograph. They were all standing on their hands, and they made a deal that the next morning they would reunite there. And when the word came that the towers had been hit by these planes, I was informed by a friend of mine who was a U.S. Marine at the U.S. Embassy here in Tel Aviv. We tried to contact our son. We could not contact him for hours. All the phone lines to New York were cut, and it took us many, many hours. So,
now, looking back at what happened then, and you today 24/7 are involved in international policy and really Israel and the world, there was, of course, the statements, now America is on a war against terror. Did that bring a difference in the Israel-U.S. policy and the Israel-U.S. relations?
It did on the strategic level. George Bush, like pro-Israel president, but in the first year of his first term in office, he was very critical of our handling of what was now called the Second Intifada. Remember, 9/11 occurs a year into the Second Intifada. Already dozens, if not hundreds, of Israelis have been maimed, killed by suicide bombers in buses and restaurants and other public places. We had to defend ourselves, and the early part of that first term in the Bush administration was very critical of it. After 9/11, pretty much a sea change, and a deeper understanding that the enemies we face are basically the same enemies, and that the values we are defending are the same, and that our enemies want to do the same thing. They're not trying to harm us, they're trying to destroy our liberties, our freedoms.
Only in terms of statements, or actual on the ground there were changes that were felt?
There are changes that occurred on the ground as well. Also, the United States gave us what they call in diplomacy tailwind. In March 2002, Israel and its army launched Operation Defensive Shield, which was basically a reoccupation of the major cities in the West Bank. And the United States gave us backing, gave us diplomatic backing for that, and it was extremely important.
Now, you came into office under the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. Was that a different ball game totally? We of course here understand that there were tensions and all, but was it really a total different ball game in terms of what we succeeded after the 9/11, the relations?
No, the Obama administration, for example, conducted the greatest number of drone strikes against terrorists. It took out Osama bin Laden, for example. The war on continued. In terms of Israel, there was an attempt by the Obama administration to have a different approach. Already by the time President Obama was elected in 2008, the American people were very tired and disillusioned by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many were ready for a new approach, and President Obama tried to reach out to what he called the Muslim world, and for most of the part, his reach out was rejected.
On the expense of that war against terror?
No. What's happening today is, if you look at where American forces are operating, whether it be in Libya or in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, the scope of American military intervention against terrorism is quite large today.
What are your hopes today in terms of the relations of Israel and America when it comes to really this war against terror?
I think we have to internalize. And I spoke at the memorial and I said this, so I'll repeat it for your sake and your viewers, that we have to understand that we are at war not with an army, not with a country or an empire. We're at war with an idea, with an evil idea. And that evil idea impelled terrorists back in 2001 to fly 2 planes into the World Trade Center and kill 3,000 people. It's exactly the same idea that led Palestinians to strap on suicide vests and get onto Israeli buses. The same evil idea that decapitated American journalists in Syria and Iraq. It's the same idea, same evil that drove Palestinians to kill 3 Israeli teenagers in Judea and Samaria, or to fire thousands of rockets at us. It's the same evil. And we have to also understand that not only we are fighting the same enemy, that we're defending the same ideas ourselves. We are defending our freedom, we're defending our liberty, we're defending our democracy. And at the end of the day, you cannot reach any other conclusion than that. Same enemy, same ideas that we need to defend, therefore we must stand together.
Another topic, Prime Minister Netanyahu published a video on Facebook, on the social media, regarding the idea that it's an ethnic cleansing if you create a Palestinian state which is Juden-free, which is free of Jews with no Jews there. What is your opinion about that video? Especially, it was presented in English, and it's a message to the world.
It is a message to the world, and it is absolutely crucial message. I mean, imagine if someone wanted to say there's a certain neighborhood or a certain state in the United States that couldn't have African Americans in it, it couldn't have Hispanics in it, it couldn't have Catholics in it. Here we are saying we're going to create a Palestinian state, which also just happens to be on the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and say, oh, you can't have Jews in it. And that has got to be the starting off point. That has to be the assumption of any negotiation you're going to have with the Palestinians. It's thoroughly, not only is it unacceptable, as the Prime Minister said, it's outrageous.
You're saying it is something very obvious, but you saw the American response. They didn't like that statement.
I'm sorry they didn't like it, but I think that this is an issue that on which we have to stand. And it is, to my mind, it is wrong both on the diplomatic level, because you don't start any negotiation on the basis of what it's going to necessarily look like at the end, or why bother having the negotiation. But right now there's a renewal of attempts to assign blame for the conflict to the settlements, which, as an historian, remember back in 2001 I was writing history, I'll tell you there was an Arab-Israeli conflict for 50 years before this first settlement was built. So how do you explain the conflict? Palestinians had already turned down a Palestinian state several times before the first settlement was built, and they turned it down with violence. How do you explain that?
So is there a solution? So is there a solution?
There is a solution. I, like the Prime Minister, favor a two-state solution. But we have to understand that that state will be demilitarized. That state will recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, like we will recognize the Palestinian state as the nation state of the Palestinian people. We will have reciprocity.
But Jews will be allowed to live in both states, and Arabs will be allowed to live in both states?
Well, Arabs are allowed to live in our states. I don't think that's a question. No one's kicking out any Arabs.
Exactly
no one's kicking out any Arabs, and no one's saying that Israel, in any solution to this conflict, we have to kick all the Arabs out of Israel. We would be accused of racism.
Exactly.
All right, but it's just what they are doing. They are being racist by saying we got to kick all the Jews out of this country. Imagine that. This is the Jewish homeland. I would like to see the United States say to a member of the Sioux tribe, okay, we're going to have Sioux tribal lands, but no Sioux can live in it. That would be the equivalent. Right. That would be the equivalent. And see how long any American politician remained in office then after saying that. So the idea is that we haven't started these negotiations yet. I hope that they will resume at some point. But it cannot be a preconceived starting out point for the negotiations that any Palestinian state will be, as you said, Judenrein. It is thoroughly unacceptable, and I believe racist.
Deputy Minister Michael Oren, thank you very much.
Thank you much. Pleasure.